I came back unannounced to surprise my family for Christmas. My wife's old father cried silently on the balcony, staring at the tree lights. Inside, my wife and her sisters laughed with her friends, as if nothing was missing. No one noticed I'd returned, but I understood everything. At dawn, I changed the locks and turned off the lights. Look, I'm not saying I'm the most romantic guy who ever walked the earth, but I had this whole thing planned out like some kind of Lifetime Christmas movie. You know the type. Guy comes home early from a business trip, wife tears up with joy, they hug in slow motion while Michael Bublé croons in the background, and somewhere a golden retriever barks approvingly. That was supposed to be my Tuesday night. Instead, what I got was more like walking into a reality TV show audition where everyone failed spectacularly, and somehow, I wasn't even invited to watch. So there I was, Marcus Wells, 59 years old and apparently invisible, standing in my own driveway at 8:30 in the evening with a suitcase that weighed about 40 pounds. Most of it gifts I'd hauled across 3 countries because I'm an idiot who thought my wife would appreciate authentic Belgian chocolates and a handcrafted ornament from some German Christmas market that smelled like cinnamon and good intentions. The Uber driver had already peeled out, probably sensing the impending disaster through some kind of cosmic rideshare intuition, and I was left standing there like a discount Santa who'd shown up to the wrong house. The first thing I noticed? My house looked like it was auditioning for the cover of Better Homes and Gardens, Excessive Christmas Edition. I'm talking lights everywhere, and I mean everywhere. The roof, the trees, the mailbox, probably the garden gnome I didn't remember buying. It looked like someone had told Clark Griswold to calm down, and he responded by doubling his efforts out of spite. The whole place was glowing brighter than a Vegas casino, and I could hear music thumping from inside. Not Christmas carols, mind you. This was full-blown Mariah Carey, All I Want for Christmas, at a volume that suggested my neighbors were either deaf or planning a noise complaint. I should have known something was off right then. But no, I'm Marcus Wells, eternal optimist and certified moron when it comes to reading rooms I haven't entered yet. I figured maybe Elaine had invited a few friends over. Maybe she was feeling festive. Maybe this was all part of some elaborate surprise for when I walked through the door. Spoiler alert, the only person getting surprised was me, and not in the good way. I fumbled with my keys, the ones I'd been carrying around Europe like some kind of security blanket, and pushed open the front door as quietly as possible. Stealth mode, you know? I wanted to catch that perfect moment of shock and awe when everyone realized I was home. Instead, what I caught was a full-blown cocktail party that had apparently started sometime around Thanksgiving and just never stopped. The living room was packed. And I don't mean like a cozy gathering of 4 or 5 people sipping wine and discussing their feelings. I'm talking at least a dozen women, all holding glasses that sparkled under my chandelier. The one I'd bought on sale 3 years ago, and Elaine said was too much, laughing like they'd just heard the world's funniest joke about tax evasion. They were draped across my furniture like they owned the place, which, legally speaking, they absolutely did not. And there she was, my wife, Elaine, 55 years old and looking like she'd just discovered the fountain of youth at the bottom of a Chardonnay bottle. She was wearing this red dress I'd never seen before, probably bought with money from our joint account while I was busy closing a hotel deal in Munich. And she was spinning around with her sister Gloria like they were auditioning for Dancing with the Stars, Midlife Crisis Edition. Gloria. Oh, sweet Lord, Gloria. If you've never met someone who laughs like a dying seagull being strangled by a kazoo, then you haven't met my sister-in-law. She's got this cackle that could strip paint off walls and has personally been through 3 divorces, which she refers to as her journey of self-discovery. What she's discovered, apparently, is that alimony runs out and her sister's husband has a decent bank account. She'd moved into our guest house, temporarily, about 19 months ago, and by temporarily, I mean she'd basically set up a permanent residence complete with her own coffee maker and a wine fridge that I definitely didn't approve. I stood there in the doorway, still holding my suitcase like an idiot, and waited for someone, anyone, to notice that the guy who pays the mortgage had just walked in. But nope, nothing, not a glance, not a pause in conversation. Elaine twirled past me close enough that I could smell her perfume, also new, also expensive, and didn't even register my existence. It was like I'd become a ghost in my own house, except ghosts probably get more attention because at least people try to avoid walking through them. That's when I noticed the balcony. And Harold, my father-in-law, the only person in this circus who seemed to have retained any sense of dignity and self-awareness. He was sitting out there in the cold December night, wrapped in his old cardigan that he'd owned since the Reagan administration, staring at the Christmas tree lights like they held the answer to every question he'd ever been too polite to ask. The reflection of those twinkling bulbs caught in his eyes, and even from where I stood, I could tell that wasn't holiday cheer making them glisten. That was straight-up sadness, the kind that settles into your bones when you realize your family has collectively lost their minds and you're too old to do anything about it except bear witness. I watched him for a long minute. This retired teacher who used to recite Shakespeare at dinner and insist we all read the newspaper before breakfast because an informed citizen is a responsible citizen. Now he sat there, forgotten on the balcony of his daughter's house, while inside, said daughter and her friends treated my credit card like it was their own personal Christmas miracle. Something shifted in my chest right then. Not quite anger yet. That would come later. But something colder and more calculating. A realization, maybe. The kind that creeps up on you when you're standing in your own home, feeling like an intruder at someone else's party. This wasn't just a surprise gone wrong. This was a whole ecosystem that had evolved in my absence, and apparently, I wasn't part of the food chain anymore. I slowly closed the front door behind me, still unnoticed, and set my suitcase down in the hallway. The Belgian chocolates could wait. The German ornament could stay wrapped. Because somewhere between the airport and this moment, my Hallmark movie fantasy had transformed into something else entirely. And as I stood there listening to Gloria's seagull laugh echo through my house, while my father-in-law sat alone in the cold, I made a decision. This Christmas was about to get interesting. All right. So before I get into the full catastrophe of how my Christmas turned into a budgeting nightmare wrapped in tinsel, let me back up and give you the context. Because I wasn't always the guy standing invisible in his own hallway while his wife throws a party that would make Gatsby jealous. No, I used to be somebody. Hell, I still am somebody. I'm Marcus Wells, 59 years old, owner of 6 mid-range hotels scattered across Florida like strategic chess pieces in a game I've been winning for the past 25 years. And before you start thinking I'm some trust fund baby who inherited daddy's empire, let me stop you right there. I built this whole thing from absolutely nothing. I'm talking ground zero, rock bottom, starting in a hole and digging up kind of nothing. My first hotel was basically a glorified roach motel off Highway 27 that I bought for the price of a decent used car. It had 12 rooms, 7 of which had functioning toilets, a front desk that was literally a card table I'd found at a garage sale, and a neon sign that only lit up the letters OT and L because apparently he had given up on life sometime during the Clinton administration. But I had something more valuable than capital or connections. I had audacity and a wife who was either crazy enough or in love enough to believe in my ridiculous dream. Elaine, my wife of 32 years. Back then, she was 23 years old with a business degree she'd earned while working 2 jobs and raising her father after her mother passed. She had this fire in her eyes, this determination that made you believe that maybe, just maybe, we could turn that dump into something people would actually pay to sleep in without demanding a tetanus shot first. Those early days were insane. I mean certifiably, institutionally insane. We'd wake up at 5 in the morning, and I'd handle repairs. I learned plumbing from YouTube videos before YouTube even existed. Folks, I'm talking actual library books and trial and error that resulted in more error than trial. While Elaine managed the books, did the marketing, cleaned rooms, and somehow still found time to make a continental breakfast that consisted of coffee I'd bought in bulk from Costco and donuts from whatever bakery was willing to give us their day-old stock-a-day discount. We lived in room 12, the one at the very end of the building, because we couldn't afford an actual apartment. Our bedroom was also our office, which was also our living room, which meant romance consisted of pushing aside manila folders full of receipts before we collapsed into bed at midnight. Sexy, right? Nothing says honeymoon phase quite like falling asleep to the sound of your husband crunching numbers and occasionally swearing at a calculator that kept eating batteries. But here's the thing, we were happy. Genuinely, stupidly, exhaustingly happy. Because we were building something together. Every new reservation felt like a victory. Every positive review, back when reviews meant someone actually taking the time to write a comment in our physical guest book, felt like we'd won the lottery. When we finally saved enough to buy our second property 3 years later, Elaine cried actual tears of joy in the parking lot while I held her, and probably also cried, but will deny it if anyone asks. Her father, Harold, moved in with us when we finally upgraded to an actual house about 15 years ago. He'd been living alone after Elaine's mother died, teaching high school English and coming home to an empty house that was slowly forgetting what laughter sounded like. We had the space by then, a 4-bedroom place in a decent neighborhood with a guest house out back, and honestly, I liked having him around. Harold was the kind of guy who read 3 newspapers every morning, did the crossword puzzle and pen like some kind of intellectual flex, and had opinions about everything from local politics to the correct way to brew tea, loose leaf. Apparently, anything else is barbaric. He had this moral backbone made of pure steel. I'm talking about a man who once returned a wallet he'd found with $3,000 in it, because that's what decent people do. Marcus, regardless of whether anyone's watching. He taught me more about integrity in casual dinner conversations than most people learn in a lifetime. And his hearing aids? They had this magical quality where they seemed to malfunction during boring conversations, but worked perfectly whenever someone started gossiping. The man was selective about his audio input, and I respected that. For about 10 years, we had this peaceful rhythm going. I'd manage the hotels. Elaine handled the administrative empire we'd built. Harold would putter around the house fixing things that weren't broken and offering unsolicited, but usually correct advice about everything. And we'd have dinner together most nights like an actual functional family unit. We took vacations. We laughed. We had inside jokes that didn't involve bitterness or passive-aggressive comments about money. Then Gloria happened. Oh, Gloria. Elaine's younger sister by 3 years, which technically makes her 52, but she acts like she's either 25 or 75, depending on what's most convenient for her narrative at any given moment. She's got this resume that reads like a country song written by someone who learned about heartbreak from a Wikipedia article. 3 ex-husbands, 2 bankruptcies, 1 restraining order, don't ask, and 0 sense of personal accountability. When she showed up on our doorstep about 19 months ago with 4 suitcases, 2 cats, and a sob story about her latest ex-husband stealing her identity. He didn't. She just spent their money and blamed him. Elaine immediately went into protective big sister mode. It's just temporary, she said. Just until Gloria gets back on her feet. I should have known right then that temporary was code for indefinite, and gets back on her feet meant figures out which relative to mooch off next. Gloria moved into the guest house, which I'd been using as a home office/man cave/place to escape to when I needed peace. Within a week, she'd redecorated it, installed a wine fridge that I definitely didn't approve, and started treating our main house like her personal social club. Her friends, and Gloria had many friends, all of whom seemed to share her talent for avoiding employment and responsibility, started showing up at random hours. Soon, Elaine was getting pulled into this vortex of wine-fueled gossip sessions and girls' nights that happened approximately 4 times a week. I tried to be understanding. I really did. I told myself that Elaine deserved friends, that she'd sacrificed a lot during our building years, that maybe this was her way of finally enjoying the fruits of our labor. But there was this shift happening, subtle at first, then increasingly obvious. The woman who used to review every expense report with me was suddenly making withdrawals I didn't recognize. The wife who used to plan our lives together was making decisions without me. And Gloria? Gloria was always there, whispering in her sister's ear, laughing that seagull laugh, treating my house like her personal resort. So when I had to take a business trip to Europe for 2 weeks, meetings in London, property tours in Paris, a potential partnership opportunity in Munich, I figured it might actually be good for us. A little space, you know? Time for me to close some deals, time for Elaine to, I don't know, realize she missed me? Get tired of Gloria's constant presence? Remember that we used to be a team? I thought I'd come back to a peaceful, pine-scented Christmas. Maybe some homemade cookies. Maybe my wife actually being excited to see me. Maybe Harold and I could sit on the balcony like we used to, drinking coffee and solving the world's problems one conversation at a time. Instead, I came back to find my wife had apparently joined a cult, and the cult's primary sacrament was expensive wine purchased with my money. So there I was, still standing in my own hallway like some kind of ghost who'd forgotten he was dead, and I made the executive decision to actually investigate what the hell was happening in my living room. Call it morbid curiosity. Call it the need to confirm my worst suspicions. Call it whatever you want. I needed to see the full scope of this disaster before I decided whether to laugh, cry, or burn the whole place down for the insurance money. I crept forward, which is ridiculous because it's my house and I shouldn't have to creep anywhere. But apparently, I'd entered some kind of alternate dimension where the rules of homeownership no longer applied to the guy whose name was on the deed. I positioned myself just outside the living room entrance, partially hidden by the wall, like a spy in my own home. Which, now that I think about it, is exactly what I'd become. The scene before me was something else. I mean, I'd seen it from the doorway, but up close and personal, it was like stumbling into a Real Housewives episode, except nobody was getting paid to act this ridiculous. They were just doing it for free. My living room, the one I'd carefully furnished over the years with pieces that Elaine and I had picked out together, the one that was supposed to represent our taste and our life, had been transformed into what I can only describe as a wine mom convention center. Elaine and Gloria were front and center, naturally. They'd pushed back the coffee table I'd bought from an estate sale in Sarasota, creating a makeshift dance floor on my expensive area rug that I'd specifically told everyone to be careful with because it was imported and apparently very delicate. The two of them were doing this thing that I guess was supposed to be dancing, but looked more like they were trying to swat invisible bees while simultaneously avoiding falling over. Mariah Carey was belting out, "All I Want for Christmas Is You" at a volume that could probably be heard in the next county, and my wife, was singing along with all the confidence of someone who'd never heard herself on a recording. Gloria was worse. She'd kicked off her shoes, which I found approximately 3 feet apart from each other like they'd had an argument and decided to separate, and she was doing this move where she'd throw her head back and laugh-scream every few seconds. That seagull laugh I mentioned earlier? Imagine it amplified by alcohol and bad decisions. It was the kind of sound that makes you understand why some animals eat their young. But the real kicker? The audience. The wine goddesses, as they apparently called themselves. And yes, I found out later that was their actual group chat name, complete with a logo someone had designed featuring a wine glass with little angel wings. There were about 8 of them scattered across my furniture, and I recognized maybe 3. There was Patricia from down the street, who I knew because she'd once crashed her Mercedes into my mailbox and blamed it on the sun being in her eyes at 8 p.m. There was Deborah with the H, who insisted everyone spell her name correctly and got offended when you didn't, even though nobody was writing it down. And then there was Karen, actual name Karen, which felt almost too on the nose, who ran the neighborhood HOA like a petty dictator and had once sent us a violation notice because our grass was a 1/4 inch too tall. The rest were strangers to me, but they all had that same look. You know the one. I've made wine drinking my entire personality look. I bought a shirt that says it's wine o'clock somewhere unironically look. I consider getting drunk on a Tuesday a form of self-care look. They were all holding glasses, my good crystal glasses, the ones we'd gotten as a wedding present, and I'd specifically asked Elaine to use only for special occasions. And they were drinking what appeared to be champagne. Not the cheap stuff either. This looked like the real deal, the kind that comes in bottles that cost more than my first car payment. And they were eating. Oh Lord, were they eating? My dining table, which I could partially see through the archway, was covered in food. Charcuterie boards that looked like they'd been catered by someone who charged by the olive. Fancy cheeses that probably had names I couldn't pronounce. Those little crackers that cost $8 a box because they're artisanal. Chocolate-covered strawberries that were arranged in a pyramid like someone was trying to impress the Queen of England. This wasn't a casual get-together. This was a full-blown event, and I was pretty sure I'd paid for all of it without knowing. The decorations were everywhere, and not the ones I'd carefully put up before I left. These were new. There were balloons, at Christmas, because apparently, we were mixing holidays now, and streamers, and someone had hung up a banner that said, "Jingle and Mingle," in glittery letters that were already shedding sparkles all over my hardwood floor like craft herpes. The Christmas tree, which I'd spent 3 hours positioning in the perfect corner and stringing with lights in a specific pattern because I'm apparently obsessive-compulsive about holiday decorations, had been redecorated. There were new ornaments, the kind you buy in bulk from HomeGoods, and they'd been hung with absolutely no regard for color coordination or spacing. It looked like Christmas had thrown up on itself. But you know what really got me? The playlist. I could hear it clearly now, and I recognized every song because I'd made this playlist. Me, Marcus, the invisible man currently lurking in his own hallway. I'd spend hours curating the perfect mix of classic Christmas songs and modern covers. Everything from Bing Crosby to Pentatonix, designed to create a warm, festive atmosphere. And they were using it, my playlist, on my sound system, in my house, for their party that I wasn't invited to. I looked over at the balcony again, and there was Harold, still sitting, still staring at those Christmas tree lights like they were the only real thing in a house full of illusions. He'd wrapped his cardigan tighter around himself, and I could see his breath making little clouds in the cold December air. The old man was freezing out there, but I guess that was preferable to being inside with the circus. Something twisted in my gut, not quite anger yet. That was still percolating, building up like pressure in a kettle. This was more like disappointment, disbelief, the kind of feeling you get when you realize that the life you thought you had was actually just a set piece, and someone had changed the script while you were off stage. I wanted to do something dramatic right then. I wanted to stride into that living room and yell, "Surprise! The bank account you've been draining is back, and he's pissed." I wanted to turn off the music mid-Mariah and watch everyone's faces fall. I wanted to ask Elaine, in front of all her wine-soaked friends, exactly when she decided that our marriage was a solo act with an occasional guest appearance by her husband. But I didn't do any of that. Because here's what I'd learned in 59 years of life. The best revenge isn't hot and immediate. It's cold and calculated. It's planned. It's surgical. And most importantly, it's surprising in all the ways that actually matter. So instead, I just stood there in the shadows of my own hallway, taking mental notes. The champagne glasses, the catered food, the new decorations, the fact that my father-in-law was sitting alone in the cold while his daughter partied like she'd won the lottery, which, in a way, she had, because apparently, my bank account was the prize. I didn't need to overhear any specific betrayal. I didn't need to catch anyone saying anything incriminating. Sometimes, betrayal isn't about words. It's about actions. It's about being forgotten in your own home. It's about working your whole life to build something, only to have it treated like a free hotel with an unlimited bar tab and no checkout time. I watched for another minute as Elaine spun around, her red dress flaring out, her face flushed with wine and what she probably thought was happiness. Gloria grabbed her hand, and they both laughed, that synchronized sister laugh that made me feel like an outsider in my own family story. And that's when I understood. This Christmas wasn't going to go the way any of us expected. Not Elaine. Not Gloria. Not the wine goddesses currently finishing off what was probably my third most expensive champagne. I quietly picked up my suitcase and headed upstairs to the guest room, because apparently, that's what I was now, a guest in my own house. But guests, I reminded myself, eventually check out. I dropped my suitcase in the guest room, which felt about as welcoming as a dentist's waiting room, and stood there for a minute, just breathing. The sound of the party was muffled up here, reduced to a dull throb of bass and occasional shrieks of laughter that made me wonder if someone was being murdered or if that was just Gloria finding something hilarious. With her, it was honestly a coin flip. But I couldn't stay up here. Not when Harold was sitting out there in the cold like some kind of forgotten Christmas decoration that nobody bothered to bring inside. The old man deserved better than being iced out, literally, by his own daughter while she played hostess to a bunch of wine-drunk women who probably couldn't remember his name if you paid them. So I headed back downstairs, moving quietly because stealth was apparently my new superpower. I grabbed my old winter jacket from the coat closet, the one I'd had since my 30s that Elaine kept threatening to throw out because it had a stain on the sleeve and wasn't presentable, and slipped out the side door that led to the balcony. The cold hit me immediately, that sharp December bite that Florida doesn't usually deliver but occasionally surprises you with, like the weather decided to remind everyone that it technically could do winter if it felt like it. Harold didn't turn around immediately. He was too focused on those Christmas lights, watching them blink in their programmed pattern like they were sending him Morse code messages from a saner dimension. I could see his shoulders hunched under that ancient cardigan, and his white hair was doing that thing where the wind made it stick up in weird directions. But he didn't seem to notice or care. "Room for one more out here?" I asked quietly, not wanting to startle him. He turned slowly, and I saw his face clearly for the first time. His eyes were wet, not crying exactly, but definitely not dry either. It was that kind of moisture that comes from disappointment, so deep it can't quite decide if it wants to be tears or just resignation. When he recognized me, something shifted in his expression. Relief, maybe, or just the comfort of seeing another sane person in an asylum. "Marcus," he said, his voice rough like he hadn't used it in a while. "You came back early." "Yeah," I said, settling into the chair next to him. The metal was cold enough to feel through my jeans, but I didn't care. Apparently, for my own funeral. Except nobody told me I was dead, so it's been awkward. He gave this broken little chuckle, the kind that's half laugh and half sigh. "They didn't even notice you?" "Nope." I stood in that hallway for a solid 5 minutes. I could have ridden in on a reindeer wearing a Santa suit and singing jingle bells through a megaphone, and they still would have ignored me. I'm beginning to think I actually died on the plane, and this is some kind of elaborate purgatory situation. Harold shook his head slowly, and I could see him processing whether to say what he was thinking. The man had always been careful with his words, a teacher's habit of measuring twice and cutting once. But something in his face told me that carefulness was about to go out the window, probably because he'd been sitting on information that was eating him alive. "How long have you been out here?" I asked. 2 hours, he said. Give or take. I stopped checking after the first hour because it just got depressing. Inside, I could hear Gloria's voice rising above the music, telling some story that had everyone cackling. Her voice had that particular quality that made you want to stuff your ears with cotton, like nails on a chalkboard, except the chalkboard was on fire and also screaming. "She's talking about her new boyfriend," Harold said quietly, his voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm I didn't know he was capable of. "Chad. Or Brad. Or possibly Thad. I honestly can't keep track anymore. Apparently, he's a free spirit who's currently between opportunities and living in his van to find himself." I snorted. "So unemployed." "Aggressively unemployed," Harold corrected. "The kind of unemployed where it's become a lifestyle choice rather than a temporary situation." She showed everyone a picture earlier. "He has a man bun and a guitar he can't play. I believe the technical term is walking red flag." I couldn't help but laugh at that. Harold had this way of delivering brutal observations with the calm precision of a surgeon, and it was honestly refreshing after watching the chaos inside. "How bad has it been?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. Harold was quiet for a moment, and I watched him choose his words carefully. This was it. This was the moment where I was going to find out exactly how much of a disaster my absence had created. "She's been spending your money like Santa on caffeine," he finally said. "Gloria, I mean. Though Elaine hasn't exactly been innocent either." My stomach did this weird flip thing. Define spending. "Do you remember 3 weeks ago when Elaine said she was organizing a charity event for the women's shelter downtown?" "Yeah," I said slowly. "She asked me to transfer $5,000 to her account for it. Said it was for venue rental and catering." Harold made this noise in his throat, somewhere between a laugh and a growl. That charity event was real. It happened. At a spa resort 2 hours away. For 2 nights. With full massage packages, facial treatments, and apparently unlimited champagne. The charity part was them feeling charitable enough to donate $200, total, not per person, to the actual shelter while spending the rest on themselves. I felt something cold settle in my chest that had nothing to do with the December air. "You're joking." I wish I was. I heard them talking about it last week. Gloria was bragging about the hot stone massage she got. Said it was exactly what she needed after all her trauma. Harold's voice was flat. Her trauma being her own bad decisions, apparently. I leaned back in my chair, staring at those same Christmas lights Harold had been watching. They didn't seem so cheerful anymore. What else? The wine fridge in the guest house. $1,200. I saw the receipt. Elaine charged it to the joint account and told Gloria it was an early Christmas present. That was 2 months ago. Then there was the emergency fund Gloria needed because her car broke down. $3,000. Except her car is fine. I see her driving it every day. I think she used that money to take Chad Brad Thad to the Keys for a week. My jaw was clenched so tight I thought my teeth might crack. Keep going. The decorations inside? All new. Bought yesterday, according to the bags I saw in the garage. Another $800, easy. The food for tonight's party? Catered. I saw the invoice on the kitchen counter. $1,400 for cheese and crackers basically. And the champagne they're drinking in there? That's the Dom Perignon you bought for our 25th wedding anniversary that Elaine said we should save for a special occasion. How many bottles? They're on their third. I did the mental math. Those bottles had cost me about $200 each. So $600 worth of champagne being consumed by people I didn't even know, celebrating nothing in particular, while the guy who bought it sat outside in the cold with the only family member who seemed to remember he existed. There's more, Harold said quietly. I've been keeping track. Not because I wanted to spy, but because someone needed to know what was happening, and you were gone. Gloria has borrowed about $20,000 in the last 6 months. Various emergencies, various excuses. Elaine approves every transfer without question because family helps family. Meanwhile, your wife has been funding what she calls her self-care journey, which apparently involves a personal trainer, weekly salon visits, and a subscription to some wine club that delivers a case every month at $180 a pop. I sat there, letting it all sink in. 20,000. Charity events that were actually spa vacations. Wine fridges and catering and champagne and decorations. All of it coming out of accounts I'd filled with money I'd earned by getting up at 5 a.m. and working until midnight, by dealing with difficult clients and property disputes and maintenance emergencies and everything else that came with running 6 hotels. Why didn't you call me? I asked. Harold turned to look at me, and his eyes were clear now, not wet anymore. Just tired. Would you have believed me? Or would you have thought I was a bitter old man making trouble? He had a point. If Harold had called me in Munich and told me this story, I probably would have thought he was exaggerating, that he was lonely and misinterpreting things, that his hearing aids were making him paranoid. I believe you now, I said. We sat in silence for a minute, and inside, the party continued. Someone cranked the music up even louder, and I heard Gloria shriek laugh again, that sound that made me want to invest in earplugs or possibly noise-canceling headphones rated for industrial construction sites. What are you going to do? Harold asked. I looked at him, this old man who'd taught me about integrity and dignity and doing the right thing even when nobody was watching. And I thought about Elaine inside, spinning in her expensive new dress, drinking expensive champagne, surrounded by people who wouldn't remember her name if the wine ran out. I thought about Gloria, the human leech who'd turned temporary into a 19-month con job. And I smiled. Not a happy smile. The kind of smile that probably would have concerned a therapist. Don't worry, old man, I said. Santa's not bringing gifts this year. He's bringing consequences. Harold and I sat on that balcony for another hour, watching the party inside slowly deteriorate from enthusiastic celebration to why is everyone moving in slow motion? The music had shifted from upbeat Mariah Carey to that weird phase of the night where someone puts on Frank Sinatra because they think it makes them classy, but really it just makes them look drunk and nostalgic. Through the glass doors, I could see the wine goddesses starting to wind down, sprawling across my furniture like they'd been hit with tranquilizer darts. Around 11:30, the exodus began. Patricia, who crashed into my mailbox, stumbled out first, calling an Uber and nearly falling off the front steps in the process. Deborah Withuage followed, making a big dramatic show of hugging everyone goodbye, like she was leaving for war instead of just going home 3 streets over. Karen, the HOA tyrant, was one of the last to leave, and I watched through the window as she tried to lecture Elaine about something, probably noise violations, which was rich considering she'd been contributing to the noise for the past 4 hours. By midnight, it was just Elaine, Gloria, and 2 stragglers I didn't recognize who'd apparently decided my couch was their new home. They were all at that stage of drunk where everything is hilarious and also slightly tragic, where you can't tell if someone's laughing or crying, and honestly, it might be both. They'll be out soon, Harold said quietly. Give it another 30 minutes, and they'll all be unconscious. That's when you should start looking. Looking for what exactly? He gave me this look, the one teachers give students when they're disappointed the lesson hasn't sunk in yet. Evidence, Marcus. You can't go into battle without ammunition. Right now, you're angry and you have my word about what's been happening. But if you want to actually do something about this, you need proof. Receipts, bank statements, emails, whatever you can find that shows exactly where your money has been going. The old man was right, of course. He'd spent 40 years teaching high school English, which meant he'd developed a 6th sense for teenage deception and the paper trails they left behind. Financial infidelity probably wasn't that different from a kid trying to hide their failing grades. So we waited. She was more like swaying in place, attempting to clean up, but mostly just moving wine glasses from one surface to another without any clear organizational system. She'd taken off her heels at some point, and her fancy red dress had a stain on it that looked suspiciously like red wine, which felt appropriately ironic. I watched her for a minute. This woman I'd been married to for 32 years, and tried to remember when things had shifted. Was it gradual? Had I missed the signs because I was too busy working? Or had this always been lurking under the surface, waiting for the right combination of wine and Gloria's bad influence to bring it out? She finally gave up on cleaning and stumbled upstairs, probably to our bedroom, probably to pass out without even wondering where her husband was. I waited another 20 minutes to make sure she was really down for the count, then quietly let myself back into the house through the side door. The living room looked like a bomb had gone off at a wine store. Empty bottles everywhere. I counted 7, which meant they'd gone through way more than just my anniversary champagne. Plates with half-eaten food scattered across every surface. Someone had spilled something red on my area rug, the expensive imported one I'd told everyone to be careful with. One of the throw pillows Elaine had insisted we needed, $35 each from some boutique store, was on the floor with what looked like a lipstick stain on it. But I wasn't there to document the mess. I was there to find the receipts, literal and metaphorical, that would explain how my bank account had become a charity for the financially irresponsible. I started with Elaine's office, a small room off the kitchen that she'd claimed years ago for household management. The desk was buried under papers, which was unlike her. The Elaine I knew was meticulous about organization. But then again, the Elaine I knew didn't throw rager parties on a Tuesday night. So clearly, I was working with outdated information. I fired up her computer. She'd never changed her password from our anniversary date, which would have been sweet if I wasn't currently investigating financial crimes, and started digging through her email. It didn't take long to find the mother lode. First, there was the charity event Harold had mentioned. I found the email chain with the spa resort, complete with itemized invoice. $5,000 for venue. Rental and catering, my ass. It was 2 nights at a luxury spa, 14 rooms, full meal packages, and something called a goddess healing experience that cost $200 per person and apparently involved crystals and questionable life advice. The actual donation to the women's shelter? $200, sent 3 days after they got back, probably because someone felt guilty enough to remember what the event was supposedly for. Then I found Gloria's emergency fund requests. $20,000 wasn't even the full total. Harold had been conservative in his estimate. I found transfers going back 8 months, each one with a different sob story. Car repairs that never happened. Medical bills that seemed suspiciously round numbers. A legal fee for $3,000 that, based on the date, coincided with a vacation to Key West that Gloria had posted about on Facebook with about 50 photos of her and some guy with a man bun doing yoga on the beach. Every single transfer had been approved by Elaine. Some of them had little notes. Poor Gloria, she's been through so much. Family helps family. She'll pay us back when she's on her feet. That last one made me laugh out loud, a bitter sound in the quiet house. Gloria paying us back was about as likely as her winning a Nobel Prize for economics. But wait, there's more. And yes, I was absolutely channeling infomercial energy at this point because the hits just kept coming. I found a folder labeled Friends Fund, which sounded innocent enough until I opened it and realized it was basically a slush fund for the wine goddesses to throw parties and events, all funded by yours truly. There were receipts for previous get-togethers, a spring fling brunch that cost $1,800, a summer solstice celebration that somehow required $2,000 despite being held in someone's backyard, and plans for a New Year's Eve extravaganza with a projected budget of $5,000 that apparently I was expected to fund without being consulted or even invited. The neighborhood Christmas gala they were planning? $3,500. And I'd bet my left kidney that exactly none of that money was actually going toward neighborhood Christmas anything. It was probably another spa weekend disguised as community service. I sat back in the chair, staring at the screen, doing mental math that made my head hurt worse than if I'd been the one drinking. Between Gloria's borrowing, Elaine's self-care, the spa vacations masquerading as charity, the wine goddess's social fund, and general spending on things like wine fridges and catered parties, we were looking at easily $40,000 in 6 months. Maybe more. $40,000. I could have bought a new car with that. I could have renovated one of the hotels. I could have, I don't know, been consulted before my wife decided to become a one-woman charity organization for people who couldn't manage their own finances. Wonderful. I muttered to the empty room, my voice dripping with enough sarcasm to pickle vegetables. My money out here doing community service while I'm getting ghosted in my own house. It's basically performing volunteer work without my consent. Very philanthropic. Mother Teresa would be so proud. I printed everything. Every receipt, every email, every bank statement that showed the transfers. The printer, which I'd bought, naturally, churned out page after page of evidence, and I organized it all into a folder with the methodical precision of someone who was way too angry to sleep, but too calculating to just start yelling. By 3 a.m., I had a complete dossier of financial infidelity. It read like a crime novel, except the criminal was my wife and her accomplice was her sister, and the victim was my bank account. I heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to see Harold, wearing his old bathrobe and looking like he hadn't been sleeping either. "Find what you needed?" he asked quietly. "And then some. Did you know they're planning a New Year's party with my money? $5,000. I'm not even invited, but apparently, I'm the sponsor." Harold shook his head slowly. "Are you going to yell? Confront them in the morning? I'll support whatever you decide, but I should warn you, Gloria's very good at playing the victim, and Elaine's been getting defensive lately when I've tried to bring up money." I looked at the folder of evidence, then at Harold, this old man who'd been watching his daughter betray everything he'd taught her about integrity and fiscal responsibility. "No," I said, and I felt this cold calm settle over me. Not rage, not even anger anymore, just pure, calculated determination. I'm not going to yell. Yelling achieves nothing except making me look like the bad guy. No, I'm going to do something better. "What's that?" I smiled, and it probably looked slightly unhinged, but Harold smiled back like he approved. "I'm going to upgrade this home from family residence to restricted property before sunrise. Think of it as installing a new security system, except instead of keeping burglars out, I'm keeping freeloaders accountable." Harold nodded slowly. "You're going to need a locksmith. Already found one online. 24-hour emergency service. Costs triple on holidays, but you know what? I can afford it. Because unlike some people, I actually earn my money instead of just spending someone else's." When I looked at the clock, 3:15 a.m. Give me 2 hours to get everything ready. By sunrise, this house is going to have new locks, new passwords, and new rules. And everyone who's been treating it like an all-inclusive resort is going to learn what happens when the management decides to review their guest privileges. Finding a 24-hour locksmith at 3:15 in the morning 2 days before Christmas turned out to be easier than I expected, which either said something about the demand for emergency lock changes during the holidays or about how many people were making impulsive security decisions at ungodly hours. I'm going to assume it was a healthy mix of both. The company I found was called Quick Lock Solutions, which sounded like either a legitimate business or a front for something illegal, but at this point, I didn't particularly care. Their website promised fast, discreet, professional service, and when I called, a guy named Tony answered on the second ring, sounding way too awake for 3 a.m., which made me think he either loved his job or had a serious caffeine addiction. "Quick Lock, this is Tony. What's your emergency?" "Hi, Tony. I need every lock in my house changed within the next 2 hours. Can you do that?" There was a pause, and I could practically hear him calculating the holiday rate multiplication in his head. "Every lock? How many we talking? Front door, back door, side door, garage entrance, and the guest house. 5 total. On Christmas week at 3 in the morning? Yeah, I can do that. Gonna cost you though. Triple rate plus emergency fee. How much? $1,200, cash or card. $1,200 to lock out people who'd stolen $40,000 from me. That was what the kids call a no-brainer. Card. How fast can you be here? Give me 45 minutes. And hey man, everything okay? You sound calm, but people don't usually change all their locks at this hour unless something's really wrong. I appreciated Tony's concern. I really did. Everything's fine, Tony. Just your average Christmas exorcism. Getting rid of some unwanted guests, spiritually speaking. He laughed at that. All right, man. I'll be there soon. And hey, sorry about whatever's going on. Don't be sorry, Tony. Be efficient. While I waited for Tony the miracle locksmith, I made coffee. Not regular coffee. I'm talking the kind of coffee that could probably power a small vehicle or possibly be classified as a controlled substance. I dumped about twice the normal amount of grounds into the machine, set it to the strongest brew setting, and watched it drip into the pot like liquid vengeance. The smell alone was enough to wake up anyone within a 50-foot radius. But fortunately, everyone in the house was either passed out drunk or in Harold's case, probably reading in his room and pretending he couldn't hear me clanking around the kitchen. The coffee finished brewing, and I poured myself a cup that was so dark it looked like I'd accidentally made motor oil instead of a beverage. First sip confirmed it tasted like battery acid mixed with regret, but it was exactly what I needed. This was fuel. This was liquid determination in a mug that said, "World's Best Dad," that my kids had given me about 15 years ago, back when they still lived at home and thought I was cool. At 4 a.m. sharp, I heard a quiet knock on the front door. I opened it to find Tony, a guy in his mid-30s wearing a company polo shirt and carrying a toolbox that looked like it had seen some things. He took one look at me, unshaven, holding battery acid coffee, probably looking slightly unhinged, and nodded like he understood completely. "Marcus?" he asked. "That's me. Come on in. Try not to trip over the unconscious wine enthusiasts in the living room." Tony stepped inside and did a quick survey of the disaster zone that was my house. Gloria was still snoring in my recliner. The two strangers were still passed out on the couch, and there were wine bottles everywhere like evidence of a very classy crime scene. "Rough party?" he asked diplomatically. "Not my party. That's kind of the problem. Let's start with the front door." Tony got to work, and I have to give the man credit. He was a professional, quiet, efficient, and didn't ask too many questions beyond the necessary ones about what kind of locks I wanted. I went with deadbolts, the serious kind that required actual keys and couldn't be picked by someone who'd watched a YouTube tutorial. While he worked on the front door, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and started the next phase of Operation Lockdown. First up, the Wi-Fi password. Our current one was Wells 2024 because Elaine had set it up and apparently thought adding an exclamation point made it secure. I changed it to Pay Your Own Bills Gloria because I'm petty and also because it made me laugh. Then I went through and disconnected every device that wasn't mine. Elaine's laptop? Disconnected. Gloria's phone? Gone. The smart TV that they'd been using to stream their reality shows and true crime documentaries? Cut off like a trust fund kid who finally pushed their parents too far. Speaking of TV, I grabbed the remote and went through the settings, removing every streaming service account that was linked to my credit card. Netflix, Hulu, HBO Max, Disney Plus, all of them gone. I even canceled the Spotify family plan, which felt especially satisfying because I knew Gloria used it constantly to play what she called healing music that was basically just wind chimes and people humming. Then came the credit cards. I logged into every account and systematically canceled or froze every card that Elaine had access to. The joint account cards? Frozen. The backup card I'd given her for emergencies? Canceled. I set up new accounts in my name only and transferred the funds I needed to operate. The joint account I left with exactly $500 in it, just enough for Elaine to buy groceries if she budgeted carefully, which would be a novel experience for her. Tony finished the front door and moved to the back entrance. I made him a cup of coffee, slightly less toxic than mine, and he accepted it gratefully while telling me about his worst lockout calls. Apparently, I wasn't even in the top 10 of weird situations Tony has encountered, which either made me feel better or more concerned about humanity in general. By 4:45, Tony was working on the guest house locks, and I was going through my phone, updating passwords for every account I could think of. Bank apps, investment accounts, the hotel management system, even my Amazon account because I'd noticed some suspicious orders for things like essential oil diffusers and motivational wall art that I definitely hadn't approved. At 5 a.m., with all the locks changed and Tony counting his very generous holiday emergency fee, I stood on the front porch and looked at my Christmas light display. It was still going strong, twinkling away like everything was merry and bright. It felt dishonest somehow, like putting a pretty bow on a dumpster fire. So I turned it all off. Every single light. The roof display, the tree lights, the pathway luminaries, The inflatable Santa in the yard that I'd never wanted but Elaine insisted was charming. I hit the master switch and watched my house go from looking like a Christmas card to looking like that one house in the neighborhood that gave up on life. It took about 2 minutes for the transformation from festive holiday home to possibly haunted, definitely uninviting, to complete. The sudden darkness was jarring, but also kind of perfect, because sometimes you need less light to see things clearly. Sometimes you need to strip away all the pretty decorations and look at what's actually underneath. I went back inside, locked the new deadbolt with my new key, and made myself another cup of terrible coffee. The house was quiet except for Gloria's snoring and the occasional creak of old wood settling. I sat at the kitchen table with my folder of evidence and my printed bank statements, watching the sky slowly lighten through the window. Around 6 a.m., I heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, shuffling footsteps that suggested someone had woken up with a hangover that could kill a horse. More footsteps, then the sound of someone bumping into a wall and cursing quietly. Elaine appeared in the hallway a minute later, wearing her silk pajamas and looking like death warmed over. Her hair was doing this thing where it stuck up on one side and was plastered flat on the other, and her makeup from last night was smeared under her eyes like sad raccoon cosplay. She blinked at me, clearly confused about why I was sitting in the kitchen at dawn looking wide awake and slightly manic. "Marcus," she said, her voice rough from sleep and probably dehydration. "When did you get home? Why are the lights off outside?" I took a slow sip of my coffee, maintaining eye contact like a predator who'd just spotted prey. "Oh, I got home around 8:30 last night. But don't worry, nobody noticed. You all seemed really busy celebrating something. Not sure what, since it wasn't my homecoming." She blinked again, processing slowly. "The Christmas lights. Why are they off?" I smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Because, honey, we needed a little less light and a lot more clarity around here. Consider it an early Christmas present, the gift of truth." "You're welcome." Elaine stood there in the hallway, swaying slightly like a tree in a mild breeze, trying to process what I'd just said. I could practically see the gears in her head turning, grinding against each other like they needed oil. She looked at me, then at the dark windows where the Christmas lights used to glow, then back at me, and I watched the slow dawn of realization creep across her hungover face. "I don't understand," she said finally, which was probably the most honest thing she'd said in months. "I know you don't," I replied, taking another sip of my nuclear-grade coffee. "But you will. Give it about 20 minutes. I'm thinking right around the time Gloria wakes up and tries to leave, things are going to get really interesting." Before Elaine could respond, we heard stirring from the living room. One of the strangers on my couch rolled over and fell onto the floor with a thud that sounded painful, followed by a confused "what the hell?" that echoed through the house. The sound was enough to wake up the other straggler, who sat up looking like she'd been hit by a truck and then reversed over for good measure. "Where am I?" The floor woman groaned, clutching her head. "My living room," I called out cheerfully. "But don't worry, you won't be staying long. There's the door." "Well, there's a door. Whether it opens for you is another question entirely." Both women stumbled toward the front entrance, desperate to escape what was probably the worst hangover of their lives. I heard them fumbling with the handle, then confused muttering, then increasingly frantic jiggling of the doorknob that wasn't going to help them because the lock had fundamentally changed since they'd entered this house. "It's locked," one of them called out, panic rising in her voice. "The door won't open." "That's because the lock's changed at 4 a.m., I said, not moving from my spot at the kitchen table. "New security system. Very exclusive. Requires authorization from the homeowner to exit." That would be me. Elaine turned to look at me, and I could see the confusion shifting into something else. Not quite alarmed yet, but getting there. "Marcus, what did you do?" "Home improvement," I said simply. "You're always saying this place needs updates." I figured I'd start with security. Can't be too careful these days, you know? Lot of people trying to take advantage of generous homeowners. The two strangers appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking desperate and slightly terrified. "Can you please unlock the door? We need to go home." I studied them for a moment. These were people I'd never met, who'd drunk my champagne and eaten my food and left their mess all over my furniture. But they weren't the real problem. They were just collateral damage in someone else's bad decisions. "Sure," I said, standing up and grabbing my new key ring. "But first, I'm going to need names and an explanation of how you know my wife." I'm Jennifer. This is Amy, the floor faller said quickly. We're friends with Gloria. She invited us. We didn't know. We thought this was her house. That was interesting. Gloria told you this was her house. Well, not exactly, but she talked about it like. We just assumed. Right, I said. Well, Jennifer and Amy, let me clear something up. This is my house. Mine and my wife's. Gloria is a temporary guest who's overstayed her welcome by about 18 months. But hey, mistakes happen. Come on, I'll let you out. I walked them to the front door, unlocked it with my shiny new key, and watched them practically sprint to their car like they were escaping a hostage situation. Which, in a way, I guess they were. When I turned back around, Elaine was standing in the living room, really looking at the chaos for the first time. Empty bottles, food everywhere, stains on the furniture, that sad, deflated balloon in the corner that had apparently given up on life. And Gloria, still passed out cold in my recliner, snoring like a chainsaw with a deviated septum. We should clean this up, Elaine said weakly. We should, I agreed. But we're not going to. Gloria's going to clean it up. Every last bit of it. And then she's going to pack her things and find somewhere else to live, because the guest house is no longer available for extended stays. That's when Gloria started to stir. She made this sound like a walrus waking up from a bad dream, stretched dramatically, and opened her eyes. It took her a minute to orient herself, and when she finally focused on me standing there, she smiled like nothing was wrong. Marcus, when did you get back? She said, her voice way too cheerful for someone who'd been unconscious in my chair for the past 6 hours. Did you bring me anything from Europe? The audacity, the sheer, unfiltered audacity of this woman never ceased to amaze me. Oh, I brought you something, I said. It's called Reality. New arrival, just dropped today. You're going to love it. She laughed that seagull laugh, apparently thinking I was joking. You're so funny. God, I need coffee. And maybe some aspirin. That wine last night was something else. That wine was $200 a bottle, I said. Multiply that by 3 bottles, and you and your friends drank $600 of my anniversary champagne while I stood outside in the hallway wondering if I'd accidentally entered a parallel universe where I didn't exist. Gloria's smile faltered slightly. Oh, was that the fancy stuff? Elaine said we could open it. We were celebrating. Celebrating what exactly? I don't know. Christmas? Life? Does it matter? I felt my jaw clench. It matters when it's my money funding your celebrations. Speaking of which, you're going to need to find your keys because you're leaving. Leaving to go where? It's like 7 in the morning. That's not my problem. But you're not staying here. The guest house locks have been changed. You no longer have access. Now the smile disappeared completely. Gloria sat up straight, looking between me and Elaine like she was waiting for her sister to defend her. You can't kick me out. Elaine invited me to stay. Elaine doesn't own this house alone, I said calmly. I do. Well, we do, but I'm the one whose name is on the mortgage, and I'm the one whose money has been funding your extended vacation from responsibility. So yes, Gloria, I absolutely can kick you out, and I am. She turned to Elaine. Are you going to let him do this? I'm your sister. Elaine looked torn, standing there in her silk pajamas looking like a defeated duchess who'd just realized her kingdom was actually someone else's property. Marcus, maybe we should talk about this privately. No, I cut her off. We're done talking privately. We're done with private conversations that lead to public disasters. Everything's on the table now. Gloria has borrowed $20,000 in 6 months with no intention of paying it back. You've spent another $20,000 on spa weekends disguised as charity events and parties I wasn't invited to. That's $40,000, Elaine. $40,000. That's not marriage. That's not family. That's embezzlement with a side of betrayal. Gloria stood up, and I could see her shifting into offense mode. I didn't embezzle anything. That was family helping family. I had emergencies. Your emergency fund paid for a vacation to Key West with your unemployed boyfriend. I saw the Facebook photos, Gloria. You're not as smart as you think you are, and I'm not as stupid as you hoped I'd be. Her face went red. You're going through my Facebook? That's stalking. It's a public profile, genius. And nice try deflecting, but we're not talking about my investigative skills. We're talking about your habit of treating my bank account like it's a community resource. That's when she went nuclear. Fine. You want me gone? I'll call the police. This is a legal eviction. I have rights. I actually laughed at that. Laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee, which would have been tragic because I'd worked hard on making it taste like liquid revenge. Please do, I said, pulling out my phone. Here, I'll dial for you. Tell them you broke into your brother-in-law's property and embezzled his savings. Tell them about the $20,000 in fake emergencies. I'll wait. In fact, I'll put it on speaker so we can all enjoy the conversation. Gloria snatched the phone out of my hand and actually started to dial before Elaine grabbed her wrist. Don't, Elaine said quietly. Just don't. That's when I noticed Harold on the balcony. He'd come outside at some point during the chaos, wrapped in his cardigan, sipping his morning tea like he was watching Wimbledon finals. When he caught my eye, he raised his cup in a small salute. The old man was enjoying this way more than he should have been, and honestly, I didn't blame him. Gloria was fuming now, pacing back and forth in my living room like a caged animal. This is insane. Elaine, tell him he's being insane. But Elaine wasn't saying anything. She just stood there, looking at the mess, looking at her sister, looking at me, and I could see something breaking behind her eyes. Not anger, not defiance. Something quieter and sadder. The realization that she'd screwed up so badly that there might not be an easy way back. You can stay, I said finally, my voice cold and level. Both of you can stay. If, and this is a big if, you agree to repay every cent and start contributing to this household like adults instead of teenagers with an unlimited credit card. Otherwise, Gloria, you've got until noon to pack your stuff. And Elaine, you've got some serious thinking to do about what kind of marriage you want going forward. Gloria scoffed. You're bluffing. I pulled out my wallet and removed my credit card, the one they'd been using like it was their own personal ATM. I took out my scissors from the kitchen drawer and cut it in half, right down the middle, while maintaining eye contact with Gloria. I said, dropping the pieces on the counter. Try using this and watch it decline faster than your third marriage. Oh wait, you can't use it because I already canceled it. Along with every other card you had access to. The joint account? Frozen. The backup emergency card? Gone. Even the Spotify family plan. Even Harold chuckled at that one. The silence that followed my credit card execution was something special. You know that moment in movies where someone drops a bomb and everyone just freezes, processing what just happened? That was my kitchen at 7:15 on a Wednesday morning. Except instead of a bomb, it was a bisected Visa card and the slow realization that the gravy train had not only left the station but had been permanently decommissioned. Gloria's mouth was literally hanging open, which was not a good look for her. Elaine had gone pale. That specific shade of white that people turn when their comfortable reality suddenly shifts beneath their feet like a rug being yanked by a particularly vindictive universe. And me? I was calm. Eerily, unsettlingly calm. The kind of calm that comes after you've spent 6 hours preparing for battle and finally get to see your strategy in action. You're insane, Gloria finally managed to say, but her voice had lost that confident edge. Now she just sounded scared, which was appropriate given the circumstances. No, I corrected her. I'm done. There's a difference. Insanity would be letting this continue. What I'm doing is called setting boundaries, which is something you should probably Google once you figure out how to pay for your own internet. I walked over to the kitchen table where I'd left my folder of evidence, my beautiful, meticulously organized folder of doom, and picked it up like a lawyer about to present a closing argument. You know what? Let's make this official. Let's have a family meeting. Everyone sit down. I don't want to sit down, Gloria protested. I don't care what you want, Gloria. Sit. Something in my voice must have convinced her I wasn't playing anymore, because she actually sat down at the table, crossing her arms defensively like a teenager who'd just been caught sneaking out. Elaine followed slowly, moving like someone walking to their own execution. She pulled out a chair across from her sister and sat down with her hands folded in her lap, staring at the table like it might offer her some kind of escape route. Harold, bless him, had come in from the balcony and was leaning against the kitchen counter, still sipping his tea like this was dinner theater and he'd paid good money for the show. I opened the folder and spread out the documents across the table like I was dealing cards in the world's most depressing poker game. Bank statements, printed emails, receipts, credit card bills. Each piece of paper was a testament to 6 months of financial infidelity, and I laid them out with the precision of someone who'd spent half the night organizing them by category and date. Let's start with the spa retreat, I said, pointing to the first set of documents. The one that was supposedly a charity event for the women's shelter. $5,000 transferred from our joint account on September 15th. Here's the invoice from the resort. 2 nights, 14 rooms, full meal package, and something called a goddess healing experience that involved hot stones and someone named Starlight who apparently channels energy for $200 an hour. Elaine wouldn't look at the papers. We did donate to the shelter. $200, I interrupted. You donated $200 out of $5,000. That's 4%, Elaine. 4% went to charity. The other 96% went to massages and champagne brunches and whatever else you all decided you needed to heal from the trauma of having too much free time. Gloria started to speak, but I held up my hand. Your turn is coming. Don't worry, I've got a whole section dedicated to you. I pulled out the next stack of papers. Gloria's emergency fund. Let's see, we've got a car repair emergency in July for $3,000. Except your car wasn't repaired because I see you driving it every day and Harold confirmed it was never in the shop. Then there's the medical emergency in August for $2,500. But there's no medical bills, no hospital visits, no explanation of what the emergency actually was. And my personal favorite, the legal fee emergency in September for $3,000 that coincided perfectly with a week-long vacation to Key West that you documented extensively on Facebook with hashtags like blessed and living my best life. I slid those papers across the table toward Gloria, who was now looking decidedly less defensive and more like a cornered animal trying to figure out which way to run. That's just 3 examples, I continued. There are 12 more. 12 more emergencies over 6 months that total, and I did the math multiple times to make sure. $22,700. Not $20,000 like Harold estimated. $22,700. He was being generous. Those were real emergencies, Gloria said weakly. I was going through a hard time. You've been going through a hard time since 1997. I shot back. At some point, Gloria, the hard time isn't happening to you. You are the hard time. You're not a victim of circumstances. You're a professional victim who's made a career out of other people's sympathy and bank accounts. Harold made a small noise that might have been a suppressed laugh. Even Elaine looked up at that one, probably shocked that I'd finally said what everyone had been thinking for years. I moved to the next section. Now let's talk about the Friends Fund, which sounds innocent until you realize it's basically a slush fund for throwing parties with my money. Spring Fling Brunch, $1,800. Summer Solstice Celebration, $2,000. Various wine club memberships, deliveries, and accessories, another $3,200 over 4 months. And my absolute favorite, the neighborhood Christmas gala that's supposedly happening next week with a budget of $3,500 that I'm expected to fund without being consulted, invited, or even acknowledged. I leaned forward, both hands on the table. That's not even counting the day-to-day spending. The $1,200 wine fridge that appeared in the guest house. The $800 in new Christmas decorations that replaced the perfectly good decorations we already had. The $1,400 for last night's catered party that I wasn't invited to, but somehow financed. The personal trainer, the salon visits, the wine subscriptions, the boutique shopping, the random transfers for things labeled girls' night and self-care, and my personal favorite vague category, miscellaneous friendship expenses. Elaine had started crying at some point, quiet tears running down her face, but I couldn't stop now. This needed to be said. All of it. Add it all up, I said, and we're looking at just over $43,000 in 6 months. That's more than $7,200 a month in unauthorized spending. That's a salary, Elaine. A full-time salary for doing absolutely nothing except drinking wine and pretending you're living in a reality show where money just magically appears. You make enough money, Gloria said suddenly, her voice sharp. It's not like you can't afford it. You own 6 hotels, Marcus. What's $40,000 to you? I stared at her, genuinely amazed at the audacity. What's $40,000? It's principle, Gloria. It's respect. It's the idea that maybe, just maybe, you should ask before spending someone else's money. It's the concept that marriage is a partnership, not a dictatorship where one person funds whatever the other person decides to do without consultation. We're family, she pressed. Family helps family. Family doesn't steal from family, I countered. Family doesn't lie about emergencies to fund vacations. Family doesn't treat their brother-in-law's house like an all-inclusive resort with an unlimited bar tab. You're not family, Gloria. You're a parasite who's been feeding off us for 19 months, and the host is finally saying enough. Harold actually did laugh at that one, a quick bark of approval that made Gloria whip around to glare at him. You think this is funny, Dad? She spat. I think it's overdue, he replied calmly. I've been watching you bleed your sister's marriage dry for over a year now, and I'm frankly relieved someone finally had the spine to say something about it. Marcus is right. You're not family at this point. You're an opportunistic infection. Elaine sobbed harder at that, and I almost felt bad. But then I remembered standing in my hallway last night, invisible in my own home, watching her dance with her sister while my father-in-law sat alone in the cold, and the sympathy evaporated. You're humiliating us, Elaine managed to say through her tears. In front of Dad. In our own home. This is cruel, Marcus. I sat down finally, suddenly exhausted. No, Elaine. You humiliated yourselves when you decided family meant free ATM with no withdrawal limits. I'm just presenting the receipts. Literally. So what now? Gloria demanded. You're just going to kick us out? Make us homeless right before Christmas? That's your big plan. I already told you the terms, I said. You can stay if you agree to repay every cent and start contributing to this household like actual adults. That means jobs, Gloria. Real jobs with paychecks and taxes and the kind of responsibility you've been running from since your first divorce. It means budgets and accountability and no more emergencies that are actually just things you want but can't afford. That's impossible, she said. I can't repay $22,000. I don't have that kind of money. Then you set up a payment plan. $100 a month would take you. Let's see. About 18 years to pay off. Better start looking for that job. Gloria stood up so fast her chair fell over backward. This is bullshit. Elaine, are you seriously going to sit there and let him treat me like this? But Elaine wasn't looking at her sister anymore. She was looking at the papers spread across the table, really seeing them for the first time. Seeing the numbers. Seeing the dates. Seeing the evidence of 6 months of choices that had led to this moment. I think, she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, you should pack your things, Gloria. Gloria left that afternoon, which was technically faster than the noon deadline I'd given her, but I think she realized that staying even one more minute in a house where everyone had collectively decided to stop enabling her was about as appealing as a root canal performed by someone who'd learned dentistry from YouTube videos. She packed her things with the kind of dramatic flair that would have made a soap opera actress jealous. Lots of door slamming, aggressive zipper noises, and muttered comments about ungrateful people and toxic family dynamics that she delivered loud enough for everyone to hear, but quiet enough that she could pretend she wasn't trying to get a reaction. Her cats, poor things, they didn't ask to be owned by a financial disaster, were shoved into carriers with less care than you'd give a bag of groceries, and she loaded up her car like she was fleeing a crime scene, which in a way, I guess she was. Before she left, she stood in the driveway and gave Elaine one last guilt trip for the road. I can't believe you're choosing him over your own sister, she said, like this was some kind of loyalty test and not a basic question of respecting other people's money and boundaries. Elaine, to her credit, didn't take the bait. She just stood there on the porch in her bathrobe, looking tired and small, and about 10 years older than she had yesterday. I'm not choosing him over you, Gloria. I'm choosing reality over delusion. There's a difference. Gloria drove off with a screech of tires that probably cost her about $50 in rubber, which was fitting since she'd spent the last 6 months burning through my money with similar efficiency. I watched her car disappear around the corner and felt exactly nothing. No victory, no satisfaction, just a kind of empty relief like when you finally remove a splinter that's been bothering you for weeks. The house was quiet after that. Weirdly, uncomfortably quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when you've had a massive explosion and now everyone's walking on eggshells trying to figure out what normal is supposed to look like anymore. Elaine and I barely spoke for the first 2 days. We moved around each other like strangers sharing a waiting room, polite but distant. She'd make coffee in the morning and leave a cup for me without saying anything. I'd do the dishes after dinner without commenting on the fact that she'd barely touched her food. We were 2 people living in the same house, but existing in completely different emotional zip codes. Harold, though? Harold became my unexpected ally in all this. We'd sit on the balcony every evening, me with my coffee, him with his tea, and talk about everything except the elephant in the house. We discussed politics, books he was reading, memories from when he used to teach, stories about his wife that I'd never heard before. It was nice, honestly, peaceful, the kind of companionship that doesn't require constant entertainment or validation. Just two people comfortable enough with silence that conversation becomes optional rather than obligatory. She's been crying, Harold mentioned on the third night, not looking at me, just staring at the Christmas tree through the window. I'd turned the lights back on, but they seemed dimmer somehow, less celebratory and more just there. I know, I said. Are you going to talk to her? Eventually. When I'm ready. When she's ready. Talking right now would just be yelling, and I'm done with yelling. He nodded slowly. You know, I taught Romeo and Juliet for 30 years, and the thing nobody tells you about that play is that the real tragedy isn't the death, it's the failure to communicate. Two families so caught up in their own pride and anger that they forget how to actually talk to each other until it's too late. Are you comparing my marriage to Shakespeare? I'm saying don't let pride make you stupid, Marcus. You've made your point. You've set your boundaries. Now figure out if you want to save the marriage or just win the argument. That hit harder than I expected. Because he was right, wasn't he? I'd won. I'd proved my point. I'd locked everyone out, literally and figuratively, and established that I wasn't going to be treated like a walking ATM anymore. But winning and being happy aren't the same thing, and sitting in a quiet house with a wife who wouldn't look at me wasn't exactly the victory I'd imagined. On the fourth day, something shifted. I came downstairs to find Elaine at the kitchen table with her own folder, not as organized as mine, but still, full of papers. When she saw me, she didn't look away this time. I've been going through everything, she said, her voice hoarse like she'd been crying recently, which she probably had. All the spending, all the transfers, all the everything. And you're right, about all of it. I poured myself coffee and sat down across from her, waiting. I don't know when it started, she continued. Or maybe I do, and I just don't want to admit it. When Gloria moved in, it felt good to have her around. Like having a sister again, you know? We used to be close when we were younger, before her marriages and divorces and all the drama. And her friends, they were fun. They made me feel young and interesting and like I was part of something. You were part of something? I said. Our marriage. Our business. Our life. I know. But you were always gone, Marcus. Europe, meetings, property tours, conferences. And when you were home, you were tired or stressed or working in your office. I felt like I was living alone even though I was married. That stung because it was true. I had been absent. Not physically always, but emotionally? Yeah. I'd been so focused on building and maintaining our business empire that I'd forgotten to maintain the actual relationship that empire was supposed to support. That doesn't excuse the spending, she said quickly, like she was worried I'd think she was making excuses. Or the lying. Or letting Gloria take advantage. I convinced myself it was fine because we could afford it. But that's not the point, is it? The point is I should have talked to you. About all of it. The loneliness, the spending, the fact that Gloria was basically using us. I should have been your partner instead of just whatever I became. A stranger, I said quietly. You became a stranger who threw parties in our house while I stood invisible in the hallway. She flinched at that. I'm so sorry, Marcus. I'm so sorry. Not because you locked me out or cut up the credit cards or any of that. You had every right to be furious. I'm sorry because I betrayed you. I betrayed us. I betrayed everything we built together, and I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try if you'll let me. This was different from the crying and the dramatics earlier. This felt real. Raw. The kind of apology that comes from actual reflection rather than just wanting the consequences to go away. I was absent too. I admitted, and saying it out loud felt like pulling off a band-aid. I hid behind work and business trips and sarcasm because it was easier than dealing with the fact that somewhere along the way, we stopped being partners and became roommates who occasionally had dinner together. I should have noticed you were unhappy. I should have made time. I should have been present instead of just here. We talked for 3 hours that morning. Really talked. Not the surface level, how was your day conversations we'd been having for years, but actual deep diving into what had gone wrong and when and how we'd both contributed to it. She told me about feeling invisible, about watching me leave for another business trip and wondering if I'd even miss her. I told her about feeling taken for granted, about working myself to exhaustion to provide a life that nobody seemed to appreciate. It wasn't comfortable. Parts of it were downright painful. But it was necessary, like lancing a wound that had been infected for too long. "I'll pay it all back," she said. "Every cent. I'll get a job if I need to. I'll sell things. Whatever it takes. We'll figure it out," I said. Together. Like partners. Like we should have been doing all along. That afternoon, she called a therapist. Not because I demanded it, but because she said she needed help understanding why she'd let things get so bad. I didn't argue. Honestly, we probably both needed therapy, individual and couples, because clearly, we'd forgotten how to function as a team somewhere between hotel number 3 and now. The days that followed were still awkward, but less hostile. More hopeful. We started having dinner together again, actually talking instead of just eating in silence. Harold joined us most nights, and his presence helped somehow, like having a referee who could call foul when either of us started slipping into old patterns. Gloria tried calling a few times, but Elaine let it go to voicemail. "I love my sister," she told me, "but I can't enable her anymore. She needs to figure out her own life, and I need to focus on fixing mine." By Christmas, which we celebrated quietly with just the 3 of us, things felt tentatively better. Not fixed. You don't fix 6 months of damage in 2 weeks, but moving in the right direction. And on New Year's Eve, I found Harold on the balcony again, but this time he was smiling. Really smiling, not the sad smile from before. "She's going to be okay," he said when I joined him. "Both of you are." "How do you know?" "Because she finally saw the dark," he said. That's the first step to finding the light again. 1 year later, the lights went up again, but this time with a crucial difference. I actually wanted them there. It was Christmas Eve, and I was standing in the driveway with Harold, who was supervising my decorating efforts with the critical eye of a man who'd spent 40 years grading essays. "That wreath is crooked," he said, pointing at the front door with his cane. "It's rustic," I argued. "It's crooked. Fix it." I fixed it. Because Harold had earned the right to be picky about Christmas decorations after everything we'd been through. The house looked good, though. Not extravagant like last year's disaster, just warm. Tasteful. The kind of Christmas display that says, "We're happy to be here," instead of "We're compensating for something." Elaine had helped pick out the decorations this time, and we'd actually discussed the budget beforehand like functional adults who'd learned that communication prevents financial catastrophes. Gloria was gone, obviously. Last I heard, she was living with her second ex-husband in Tennessee, which was either a sign of personal growth or just running out of other options. Either way, she wasn't my problem anymore. Elaine talked to her occasionally, brief phone calls that were cordial but boundaried, the way you'd talk to a distant acquaintance rather than someone who'd lived in your guest house for 19 months. The guest house itself had been converted into Harold's art studio. Turned out the old man had always wanted to paint, and retirement plus escaping from Gloria's chaos had given him the time and motivation. His landscapes were actually pretty good, or maybe I just appreciated them more because they represented freedom from wine fridges and seagull laughs. Inside, Elaine was making cookies, actual homemade cookies, not the catered kind that cost $40 a dozen. We'd spent the last year rebuilding, slowly, with joint therapy sessions that were sometimes brutal but always necessary. She'd gotten a part-time job managing a bookstore downtown, not because we needed the money, but because she needed her own identity outside of being Marcus's wife or Gloria's sister. The wine goddesses still existed, but Elaine saw them maybe once a month now, and the gatherings were coffee dates where everyone paid for their own drinks like reasonable adults. We'd paid back most of the money. Well, Elaine had, through her paychecks and some careful budgeting that would have been impossible for the person she was a year ago. Gloria hadn't paid back a cent, which surprised exactly nobody. That evening, Harold sat on the same balcony where this whole thing had started, but instead of tears reflecting in the Christmas lights, I saw contentment. He was holding hot cocoa that Elaine had made from scratch, wearing a Santa hat that our kids had sent him, looking genuinely happy. "You did good, Marcus," he said when I joined him. "We did good," I corrected. "All of us. Together." And that was the truth. Sometimes the most peaceful Christmas gift isn't presents or parties or expensive champagne. Sometimes it's boundaries, honest conversations, and the courage to turn off the lights until people remember to value what they have. Family isn't about who laughs loudest in your living room. It's about who sits quietly with you on the balcony when everything goes dark, and who stays when you finally turn the lights back on.